crafting with myself, Jennifer Huff, and the Joyful Table. I'm so glad that you're here to join us this month. On this lesson, I'm actually going to teach you how to make two different signs that we had kits for this month. One is the sign that says boo, and that's for Halloween. And the other one is a large sign that says welcome that you can put on your front porch. Since both of them have kind of the same technique, we're going to do them at the same time. All right, so you should have, in your kit, you should have sandpaper and sponges and paint and stencils and your wood. The only things I need you to add to complete this project are things you could find around your house. So one is scissors, so we'll need that for the stencils later. The other is some kind of hard card. So this is just an old gift card, but you can use a driver's license or an ID card, anything you have that we can like scrape the stencil with. You're gonna need that in a little bit. And the last thing you need is a little sharp object. So you can use a needle or anything that's got like a pokey end to it. This is actually a thread puller, and I like it just because it's kind of cushy and soft, so I like to have it in my hand. But you can use a safety pin, anything you have. You can really even just use your fingernail to peel up the stencils. Sometimes we do really small wording and you're gonna want something sharp, but if not, it's okay. When your sign is dry, you can peel it up with your finger. But if you have something sharp, let's use that. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to sand our boards. So a good rule of thumb is that you just need to sand your board enough so that you don't get any splinters, okay? So we're going to use our sandpaper, and we're just going to do a tiny little rub, kind of like this, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, all the way around. And then you want to do your 4 corners, and then flip it, and do it again, all the way around, okay? So for the sake of time, I already sanded before the video, so that'll save us those few minutes. If you need to pause and sand your board, that's totally fine. You can pause at any point in the video and then just keep going when you need to. All right, so next, when we look at our board, this is blonde wood. I really love this wood. It's like super expensive, and I have them cut it down at Lowe's, but I have just, I love it because when you put a stencil on it, it doesn't tear up the wood, and some of the wood that we use will rip up whenever you rip the stencil up. And then second, it's just super flat and pretty, so it just works really well for making perfect, like professional looking signs. Now the thing with the blonde wood is that only one side is primed, okay? So if we flip kind of this wood, we might see that this side, along with some free toddler footprints you might have on there, is got some dark wood grain on it. So if you kind of see that dark graining, that is showing you that that side is not primed, okay? Now this side is more of a solid white. It's a very subtle difference, but if you look, you'll be able to see it. And this side that's more solid white is primed. We're going to go ahead and use this side because it doesn't quite soak the paint in as quickly, and it makes it a little bit easier to work with, okay? If you're doing the boo sign, you should have a bright white color. Now, so this first step's a little bit confusing. If you've never done a sign with us, then you're going to have to trust me. It feels like you're painting the background, but you're really not. You're actually painting the letter color first, okay? So we're going to paint the letter color, put the stencil on, and then when we paint the background color and we peel the stencil up, that reveals that letter color that we first started with, okay? So whatever you chose as your letter color, that's what we're going to be doing on this layer. So in the case of the boo sign, that's a bright white, and in the case of the welcome sign, it's whatever you chose. Most people chose an antique white, but there was also some blues and some reds. So whatever it was that you chose, that's what you're doing right now is your letter color, okay? So I'm going to get started with the boo sign. Now, we just want to go all the way down and up and down. You don't have to go across the whole sign, but I like, just like my rule when working with this is just try to go as thin as you can. So we don't want any paint texture on here, okay? So we just want to spread it out like as best we can. This can be a pretty thin coat. It should dry fairly quickly. And we want to stay just in the direction of the wood grain. So even though this isn't like solid wood, and you can't really see like a true wood grain, we kind of fake it a little bit, okay? Now, with this boo sign, like I said, it is like a solid white, so you can almost not even see the color. It's a very subtle difference between the blonde wood and when it's painted white, but that's okay. You'll notice it at the end because we really want that stark white to give that black and white for the Halloween, okay? So that one is good. So like I said, a very thin coat just to get that solid white color, all right? Now, same thing for your welcome sign. And again, remember, you're painting letter color. Okay, so this is not your background color, this is your letter color. Now, you don't need, at this step, you do not need to paint any of the edges of your sign. This is just the front of the sign, since remember, this is going to be what reveals as your letter color, okay? So I'm just going to work my way back and forth. I'm spreading out this paint as far as I can. You can always add a second coat to this if you don't like it, like if you don't think that it's pure enough or dark enough, especially maybe if you're using the blue or the red, that's kind of like a dark color. This white is kind of hard to even tell the difference because it matches so well with the blonde wood, but this will be great. It gives it a nice even coat. But especially if you're using like the red or the brown, red or black or blue, some people chose for their letter color. If you're using any of those as your letter color, it's very likely you're going to have to use 2 coats for it to be as dark as you want it. Because however this sign looks right now, excuse me, however this sign ends up looking, this is going to be what your final product looks like. So what I mean is, nothing about the letter color is going to change after this point, so I want you to do the front of this sign to how you like it, okay? So if that means it takes 2 coats or even 3, that's totally fine. What you don't want to do is to just do a crazy thick coat on this side, okay? So if, I know you want it to be dark, but it's going to take a little bit of time. So for it to be dark, you need to do 2 or 3 coats very thin, okay? Because we're really layering this on. We're putting on the stencils, we're putting on another coat of this color to seal the stencil, and then we're putting on our darker color or your top coat. So you just really don't want to have already on your first coat to have like paint texture or thick spots, okay? So I really I spread this out as far as I can. Another way you can really tell if you're doing it thin enough is, basically, by the time I get done painting this whole side, it's dry, okay? So if you still see a ton of spots that are really wet, then you probably put it on too thick. So that's fine. You just go back and take your sponge and just keep spreading it out. Like I said, just keep working in that wood grain pattern. So just up and down, okay? So once I've got that done, so I've got my white boo sign, I've got my antique white welcome sign. So I'm done with that for now. I'm not going to get rid of these sponges yet because I'm going to show you that we're going to actually seal the stencil. So I'll teach you about that in just a second. Let me go ahead and wipe my fingers just a little bit. You know, we have like a bajillion children in diapers, so baby wipes are my hand wash of choice. If you need to stop and go wash your hands, that's totally fine. All of this paint is like pretty much typical house paint. I kind of like ruin my nails with it, and then at the end I'll just scrub it off with a sponge and it'll come off. But I don't want get my white hands all over the project. Okay, let me get that wiped off. Got everything to the side. All right, my stencil, like I said, my sign is almost dry. But let's go ahead and look at our stencil. So for the welcome sign, you actually have 2 stencils. So you have like the WELC, and then you also have the top and the bottom little wreaths that are going to decorate it. And then for the other half of the stencil, you have a tiny bit of the C, just so you can line up your letters, and then you have the rest of your letters for the word welcome, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and use my scissors, and I'm going to cut apart these little pieces that are extra, okay? So let me just cut apart. I need 1 wreath is going to go on the bottom, and 1 wreath is going to go on the top, up here. And then I'm going to kind of just trim off a little bit of my word welcome just to get rid of kind of that extra little spots right here that I don't need. All right, trim that off. And then I'm actually going to just lay down my letters for right now. Before I get started, I'm just going to lay them on my sign just to kind of get a feel of how big this sign is, and also to see kind of how I want to do my spacing. So I like that. I kind of like to err on on the side of things being a little bit higher than lower. So if there's gonna be like a blank space, I'd rather that be like at the bottom than at the top. So when we actually go to put this stencil on, you'll notice that I'm gonna actually start at the top and work my way down. And that's because if I was off on my estimation for like where the center of this is for the stencil placement, I'd rather have that little gap or offness be at the bottom than to be at the top, okay? I'm gonna set this aside for just a second because I think, well, yeah, it's pretty dry. Okay, it was looking like it wasn't dry yet, but I think I'm gonna go ahead and do my stencil for my boo sign first since I painted that one first. So I'm gonna set this aside. Let me show you the boo stencil. All right, so let me pull this one back. I'll just stack it on here while that's still drying. So we have this, how fun. Now, the way that you want to be able to tell if this one is centered is you have this perfectly straight line of the top of your spider web and the perfectly straight line along the side, okay? So let me show you how to lift a stencil. We already did all the hard vinyl work for you, so when this is printed, it just looks like a black piece of vinyl, but we peeled up all the excess and we pulled out all the little insides, and we actually put the transfer tape on here. So this clear stuff that's on the front is called transfer tape, and its job is to pick up the vinyl and transfer it onto your work surface, okay? So now I'm just gonna use my little scraper. It should not take a lot of scraping to get this off. When I started earlier, I was like picking up some and it just like came right off. I hadn't even scraped it at all. But I kind of like scraping. I think it's fun and therapeutic. And even if you're not doing this sign, if you're doing the other one, it's fine. This is the same concept that you're doing for the welcome sign. So this will give you some like good mental practice for, okay, here's what I'm about to do. All right, so now I'm gonna start peeling. I like to always peel at a diagonal. I feel like it picks up better. I peel at a diagonal and I'm gonna get all of that black vinyl to come off of my white backing. I like it when it messes up because then I can show you. So you can see, oh, it didn't give me long to show you. Part of my black was staying behind, it wasn't coming off. So I'd actually go back and just make sure that it picks up all of that vinyl. If I need to, I'm gonna squeeze the back of the paper and squeeze the front and then keep going. And it should just continue to pick up all of that. So you should end up with my clear paper that has all of my wording on it and my spider and everything, and then I should end up with like just this piece of paper. This paper is trash at this point, so I'm just gonna fold that up, throw that aside. All right, so now I stand over my sign, and I'll show you this once I get it attached. When I lay this down, it's not gonna stick until I push it, so you'll have some wiggle room to kind of move it around and get it exactly where you want it. So like I said, I'm going to use those straight lines on the spider web to really help me center this. So I want to make sure that the distance between the side and the spider web, the side of my wood and the spider web, and the distance between the top and my spider web are the same. Okay, so I'm about, let's say, 1/2 inch away. And then I kind of just look all the way down my sign, and I want to make sure that it looks straight. Okay. If you want to measure this, if you're, super type A to my type B, then you can get out and take measure and you can look. But I kind of just eyeball it, and I get that, but like I said, those lines to be straight. And when I think that is all good and well and straight, I'm going to start by just pushing it down gently with my hand. And that's pretty much going to put it in place, okay? But we're going to go back, and we're going to use our scraper card. And I'm going to go back over all of that black vinyl. And now I'm just trying to get that black vinyl to stick, okay? So cross your fingers, say your prayers. Sometimes it sticks really well. Sometimes it gives us a little bit more of a hard time. Don't do this step or don't attempt to put this on if you're wet at all. So please make sure that you're super dry. That'll make it so much easier. You would rather wait 5 minutes, go get a drink, do whatever, and let it dry than you would to put it on there while it's wet, and then it's going to take you forever to transfer the vinyl on here, okay? So let's see how we did. So once I've scraped it pretty good, I'm going to peel again at a diagonal, and I always just kind of peel it perpendicular, no, just kidding, parallel to the board, and I'm just going to peel it. Okay, so some of my lettering, I hope you can see that. Some of my lettering started to come off a little bit, if you have that kind of issue, you can always lift that letter a little bit to where you weren't having an issue anymore, like where it was laying flat, and that'll help you kind of get it to stick down. So I'm going to use my one hand to hold that letter down. Mine was peeling up just a little bit, probably because I did it super quick, because I'm trying to show you guys. But I think if you wait a couple minutes longer, you might have a little bit more success than I did in getting it to stick the first time and not having to really hold it down. The other thing you can do is you can kind of go one letter at a time. So I got that one O down. Let me scrape down this O just to make sure it gets as much as it can. And like I said, I'm going to use my left hand. Every inch or so, I kind of just move my finger as this one pulls. And once that letter is done, then if I need to, I could peel it a little bit and just push it down nice and flat, just as straight as I can get it. All right, once it's disconnected from the transfer tape, it really should stick well. You shouldn't really have any problems, but sometimes this transfer tape just, is in a mood and it wants to be super sticky. I also just got a brand new roll, so I feel like I haven't gotten a chance to ruin any of it. So it's doing its job really well, which makes it a little bit hard to get this off, but for the most part, I think we'll be okay. So I'm going to get started on this corner. So as I peel up, just going a little bit at a time. You really just, even like I said, even if you have to move the vinyl just a tiny bit to get it to stick. So I finished that letter. Now, this is kind of getting annoying to me because it's so long. So you can just go ahead and cut this off because this is all just trash. So I want this sticky stuff out of my way when I go work on this spider and stuff because it's a little bit more detail. So I'll take that off, go work on my bee. You've got a little bit of a bend in it, so I'm just picking it up just a tiny bit. And you can use your poker to do that too if you need to get under that vinyl. But there we go. So I've got the boo on there. Now I just got to work on the spider web and the spider. So I'm going to turn it. And then I'm going to work on that spider web real quick. All right. So do as I say and not as I do, and wait a few minutes for it to dry. It'll make this step so much easier. So, all right. Now I'm going to start peeling this off. Okay, good. The spider web's not being as difficult as the letters were. I think just the letters being big. Oh, this little piece wasn't coming with me and I kept going, so I want to watch out, make sure you don't do that. Just get all of that black vinyl to stick. If you have to use your fingers or have somebody else come help you hold it down, you should be good, but just in case, just pay attention, and you want to get that to stick as well as possible, just so you don't end up with a whole lot of bubbles or anything like that. But, all right, get that to stick down. All right, last thing on this one is the spider. Now this one, the spider is like pretty thin, the vinyl is pretty thin, so I'm just going to go real slow so I don't rip off any legs or anything like that. So if anything doesn't stick, I want to make sure I see that. Oh. And then I'm just going to push those down where they're nice and straight. All right, so that looks good. I had a little bit of bubbles on my spider web, and because I'm brave like that, I'm going to peel up just a little bit and then push it back down where I know it needs to go. The hardest part is if you stretch your vinyl. So if you stretch your vinyl too much, that's pretty hard to fix. So just be careful that you don't pull on the vinyl and stretch it. As far as if you end up with a big bend because you stretched your vinyl a little bit. So let's say I like the way this part of the spider web looks and I like the way this part, but the inside is got a couple little, I can just clip that vinyl and then lay that piece down, and then I can lay my other piece and I can lay them on top of each other. So there's some ways you can kind of cheat just a little bit, which of course if we were in person I could do all those little things for you, but just kind of teaching you a little trick if you were like me and you stretched it just a tiny bit. But if you go slow and pay attention and just watch out that all that stays behind, you should be fine. Okay, now for this one, since we're already done with this part, I'm going to show you real quick how we're going to seal the stencil. Now, sealing the stencil helps. If there's any part that like is sticking up a little bit, I'm gonna pay attention. I'm trying to push down everything as best I can. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use that wet sponge that I had before with the same color. I do not want a ton on here, so I literally just dipped it and wiped it right off. And I'm gonna push down, like I said, I looked around, I kind of pushed everything down as best I can. Now I'm gonna do a super thin coat over the top of all of this vinyl, okay? So the goal of that is if you have any leaking going on, then the leaking is gonna leak in white instead of the black, so you don't end up with like big black, spots everywhere on your sign. So this will help kind of eliminate some of that leaking. All right, so just again, a very thin coat, just like you did like in the beginning. I don't want it to be crazy thick because I want it to dry here in just a second. So that one is good. This one is ready for the top coat. So we're gonna set that aside. All right, so now, I'll wipe my fingers just a little bit. Now again, we're gonna go back to our welcome stencil, which is gonna be a few pieces. So first thing we're gonna apply is one of the wreaths. So that's gonna be at the top of our sign. So just scrape it. It should peel off pretty easily. It seems like this black vinyl is doing a good job sticking. Makes it a little bit harder to get off. And then I'm gonna put it here at the top, and I'll show you this in just a second. I kind of went about, 2 inches from the top, and then I just make sure that that's nice and straight. So you can see I'm about 2 inches from the top there. And I can scrape that and put that piece on. Let's see how this one treats me. I like it better whenever the vinyl is cut into smaller pieces because it just is easier to get this transfer tape off. That one was like 10 times easier than the boo sign, so hopefully it was just because I was working a little bit too quickly. I want it to be easy for you. I want it to be fun and easy. Okay, so now I'm gonna start with my WELC, okay? And like I said, that's because I just want to be able to be kind of in control of my spacing, especially when I get down to the bottom. So let me just peel up this clear. So the clear is going to pick up all of that black. This can go aside. And then I'm going to place this on here. And I'm just going to really check and pay attention for the fact that it's centered. Okay, so I'm going to look at that by checking both sides of my W, that they're the same distance from the side of the wood. Okay, so I'm gonna check that. And then I kind of held that down just a tiny bit. And I check my C. Okay, I like the way this looks. I think it's nice and straight and centered. So I'm gonna rub it first with my hand. That kind of sets it in place where it's gonna go. And then next I'm just gonna scrape it really good. Take out some of your frustration if you need to. I always enjoy scraping. Some people really enjoy sanding. They'll sit and sand for 20 minutes of the party. But I like the scraping aspect. Okay, so now we're scraped. Now I'm going to peel back this transfer tape. I peel it at an angle parallel to the wood. And I'm just paying like close attention to, is all the black vinyl staying behind? This one is sticking like amazingly well, so I'm not really stressed about it. I'm going pretty quickly. But just pay attention so you can get all of that off. So, ta-da! So far, okay? So let me get this other part down here. So now, on this next part, you'll notice that there's like a tiny little like half moon. So that half moon is actually the very bottom of a C, okay? And I did that because I want you to be able to get the spacing between the letters exactly correct. So we're going to use that to help us figure out where to put this next stencil. So we're going to lay this down, and I want that little half C to overlap with the other C, and that will show me exactly where the rest of my letters are going to go. The only thing you have to be careful about is when that black vinyl sticks to the other black vinyl, it's stuck, like it's really going to stick. It's not quite like with the wood where you can kind of move it around. When that black vinyl goes down, it's down. So I'm going to kind of look at my bottom first, the E and the M, and I just want to make sure they're absolutely as straight and centered as they're going to get before I come up here and get that C piece to overlap, okay? So I got those on there, scrape them all down. All right, and I'm gonna peel off. Now, here's the other thing. You don't actually need that little piece of that C, okay? So even though I did a really good job of overlapping it, I can still kind of see where a little bit of the vinyl was off. So I'm actually gonna go back, I'm taking that off, okay? So you can peel that little C. That C was just to help you place the OME. You don't need that tiny little overlapping piece. So just take that off and set it aside. That way you don't have like an imperfect looking letter at that point. All right, last thing is my bottom half of my wreath. And I kind of looking at that spacing, I'm seeing like how far it was from the W. I kind of want to match that on my bottom. So I've got about an inch between that, and then I've got an inch I'm going to put between my E and the bottom half of my wreath. Okay, and I want to make sure, I was a little bit over to the side, so I'm going to make sure that it's as centered and straight as I can get it. So once I have it where I like it, there we go. So just scrape that on there, peel that transfer tape off, and then we're going to seal the stencil just like we did with the boo sign. So I'm going to just, I had to, since I've been talking too much, I'm going to dip my sponge a little bit and wipe it off just to get it a tiny bit. I want to see that sponge texture, okay? I want to see that sponge texture. I don't want to see like drips coming down or anything. So just a little bit of paint, just enough to really put a super light coat. And I'm pushing that on all of the sides, everywhere where I have vinyl. I'm just putting this super, super thin coat over here. Especially because this one stuck so well. I'm not really concerned that it's gonna leak, but I like to do this because I think it just gives you the best looking letters in the end. So kind of try to stay with your wood grain, very light, very thin layer, okay? So this sign should literally, like this white layer should be dry in the next like 30 seconds. So that one is totally fine. I'm gonna set that aside. All right, I'm gonna swap my signs now because I did the boo one first. I'm gonna let the welcome one dry just a little bit. Try not to spill all my paint containers. I opened all of the lids foolishly. I'll probably spill one by the end of this, but we're gonna try not to. Okay, so now I am on to my background color, okay? For the welcome sign, I'm doing like a dark brown. And for the boo sign, I'm doing a black, okay? Now, since I had a little bit of issues with my spider web, I'm gonna just be careful as I go sponge up there. I don't wanna go crazy at all with the coloring, just so it doesn't leak, just in case, because I'm kind of going for a little bit of a perfect look, which is hard for me. I like to kind of go distressed because it's a little bit easier. But on this particular one, I kind of like the clean, crisp look for this Halloween sign. So the first thing I'm gonna do is dip in my black. I'm gonna wipe it off a little bit, and I'm gonna do all my edges, okay? So now this is our final product. So we want these edges to be black, okay? These edges, since they're raw and cut, they soak up a ton of paint. So don't feel bad if you're like, oh my gosh, I feel like I just dipped my sponge. That's okay. I just kind of go back and forth. I really push that paint into there, all right? Now I'm gonna just work my way around this sign, okay? So I'm just gonna keep going. And what you see is what you get. So what I mean when I say that is this is your final coat, like this is your final step for the background color. So you need to like it. So if you don't think that it's covering well enough, if you don't like the way that the sides look, if you've got some wood grain showing through the side and you want to do it some more, feel free, okay? But I always say try to do 2 thin coats rather than a thick coat. So if you go do what I'm doing, which is really just getting some initial coverage on here, and then let it dry for a few minutes, and then if you're still not happy with it, then you can go back and do a second coat, okay? Now, for the front of these signs, this is what's going to take a little bit of time. I'll have to become a storyteller, is do this, kind of stresses me out, I'm not gonna lie. It's just not gonna look as good, okay? So you can do that, and you might have to do 2 or 3 coats before you get a really solid color. But I really recommend spouncing, okay? So if you have not been in one of my parties before, you may not be familiar with that word. Spouncing is your sponge is bouncing. I don't know if I made that up. I don't know if it's someone else that said it to me. I don't know, but I've always said that. So what we want to do is we want to get that good, dark, solid coverage by bouncing our sponge up and down in kind of like tiny little circles, okay? Now, the hard part about this is that it takes forever, okay? So especially when we get to the welcome sign, this one's a little bit smaller, so I'm trying to get it done first. But I'm just going to go through here, and I'm just bouncing. Now, the temptation of this is to use a ton of paint, because if you use a lot of paint, then it makes it a little bit easier. You're like, oh man, this is going faster than hers. But in the end, you might peel up your paint because it's like so thick and it's stuck together. So kind of my rule of thumb for spouncing is that you want it to be thick enough that I can't see the wood through it, okay? So this is my final coat, so I want it to be black, okay? So I don't want to see that through there. So I just kind of, like I said, I work in these little circles. Second is I still should be able to see all of my stencil outline, okay? So if I'm putting so much paint that all I see is like paint and like gobs and gobs of paint, then that's just way too much for this step, okay? So as long as that took me, I mean, that was a pretty, show you some progress. That took me a few minutes, but I'm almost halfway done, so it's not too terrible, okay? So just enjoy this step. Especially if you had any like sponge or stencil drama like I did a little bit on my spider web. I definitely don't want you just to rub over your stencil because you're in a hurry, because it's going to be so much harder to correct the leaking spots afterwards if you hurry than it would be if you would just enjoy yourself, take your time, don't use a ton of paint, move that paint around. I like to really just stretch it as far as I can go. I just found that if you rub a lot or if you use a ton of paint, you're a lot more likely to either rip up your stencil, which would really stink because you don't have another one. You can't just fix that. You have to be there with like little brushes and doing all that, which just is, who's got time for that? And then, you know, second would just be that like you'll leak underneath there because you're using so much paint, it has nowhere to go, and I do not want to do that. So now that I'm past the letters that stuck really well and I'm up here, so if you have any part of your vinyl that's not sticking super well, before you go spounce it, just use your finger and push down those spots. So I'm going to say, okay, let me do the spider part. I'm going to push down anything that I think may not be sticking 100%, and then I'm going to go do that spider area, okay? So just help yourself out as best you can to get all those little spots pushed down, all right? So you see I'm having to dip a whole lot. That's because I don't want a ton of paint on here. I just want to dip and wipe it off, okay? So I dipped and I wiped it off. Now I'm doing my spider web. I'm going to push down, and then I'm going to go ahead and knock this spider web out, and I'm going to be almost done with the Halloween sign. So that'll be easy breezy, mac and cheesy. And then we'll go on to do our welcome sign. It's the same thing with the welcome sign. I might show you a little bit. It's a different color, and then maybe a little bit of streaking technique that we'll use there. But other than that, it's really the same concept. Now, if you've got too much paint, if you know, just got too excited or, you know, got a little bit overzealous in the middle of this, the other thing you can do is just flip your sponge over, and you can use the back part that's not as, not wet, obviously. And I can kind of go through here, and I'm going to just pat, trying to get off some of those areas that I might have done a little bit too much. If it's too thick and you need to help move paint around some. But on the other hand too, if it's not thick enough, you could definitely go back and just kind of work in those little circles. Don't necessarily, like, so when I come back down here to my O, I touched it with my finger, so I don't want that. So I'm going to touch that up a little bit with my sponge. Now, so when I come back down here to my O, I'm not sure if you can see it or not, but there's a couple spots where I can see the white a little bit through. So I'm not dipping my sponge again. I'm just using this sponge that I still have, and I'm just working in circles. If you work in circles, kind of like putting on like some foundation or something, kind of just pop, 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 pop in circles, that really helps to get all of those little spots. And I don't mean to, you know, say this like a million times, but again, this step is a what you see is what you get, okay? So whatever black we end up with at the end of this step is going to be what your sign looks like. So you want to make sure that you're happy with it, okay? And if that means you need to let it dry completely and then come back and look at it or ask someone else's opinion so they can look at it, that's totally fine, okay? So walk away, go to the bathroom, go get a snack, go get dessert, and then come back and look and see if you like it. Now, that way, if you don't like it, you can do another coat, okay? So another thin coat. All right, so let me swap this. This just needs to dry. Let me pull back over my huge welcome sign. Try not to get all my black fingertips on there. All right, pull this. There we go. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and do the same thing on this welcome sign, except for we're going to use our brown. Here it is. I lost my last sponge. Okay, so now I have my last sponge. I'm going to get going. Now this is like kind of weird looking. It's definitely thicker than regular paint, so you'll notice that it's a bit thicker than even like the black that you use. So when you get your first couple like spongefuls, you're like, oh my gosh. The reason being is it's actually a special kind of stain that's meant to fill in any splintery areas. It's actually for like doing a deck, okay? So you think about like if you're wanting to redo your deck and you want to get rid of all of those rough spots, that's actually what this type of stain is for. So it's meant to be thick. So it kind of goes in these little cracks and it fills in those splinter spots, which is kind of cool, I think. But just so you know, it's not like it's meant to be thick. That's okay for it to be that way, okay? So it's a little bit weird to work with, but it stretches pretty far. And we're just going to do the same thing. I'm going to go around this outside and work my way all the way down. I want this to be nice and dark, so I'm dipping several times on here. Sorry, probably out of view. And let me just do the ends of this sign before I work my way back. All right. This is like the tallest sign that we've ever done. So I couldn't even figure out how to get it all in the camera's vision. Okay, so let me flip it over on this side. I don't necessarily put it all the way over to the side because I don't want anything to get stuck on it or anything. You don't have to worry about the back. We're just gonna be doing the front and the sides. Okay, nobody should see that. It should be like leaning against your house or in your porch. The other thing about this stain is it is, it should be pretty protected from the outdoor like elements. So that'll help kind of protect. Woo! I'm sliding down. That'll help protect your wood just a little bit from your sign. I still, like I always say, when we make outdoor signs, I would definitely not put it outside if it's somewhere that gets rained on all of the time. I remember at our old house, I bought this big welcome sign just like this at Hobby Lobby, and I totally justified it because we were selling our house, because I never buy anything that I can make myself, which is terrible, but I'll always buy stuff that has like metal work in it and things like that, because metal I don't do, but if it's wood, I'm like, nah, I'm not gonna buy that, I can make that. But anyway, I ended up buying this sign because we were selling our house, and I saved all that money by not having a realtor because I was selling it myself. So part of staging it was this big old welcome sign. Well, the big old welcome sign was getting wet, and it like seriously lasted like 2 weeks, and then it was falling apart. And I was like, really? Like, I spent a lot of money on this sign. So now I just have a little bit more of a covered porch, so I can put stuff out there and it's not gonna really get soaking wet. So I just wouldn't recommend putting this somewhere that's getting just direct rainfall, okay? And I think that goes for everything you put on your porch, right? All right, so now I am spouncing again. So just trying to get, now the thing with this thicker paint is you can see a little bit more texture. So 2 things. One, I want this sign to kind of look like it's stained and not necessarily just painted with the brown paint. So I do think the brown paint kind of gives the illusion of the stain in the end. But I'm actually going to go and I'm doing my first coat like spouncing like this. But after I get up about halfway, I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit and do something I kind of told you not to do. And one of the reasons I'm willing to do this is that I really want to go for that stained wood look. And then the second thing is because my stencil stuck like super well, so I know that it's not going to shove a lot of paint underneath it. Whereas like with my spider web, it was a little bit sketchy, so I would definitely not, I would not have rubbed on that stencil. But since we've already got that layer of white that's on here and it sealed the stencil, now I've got this layer of brown. I'm really trying to get a thick coat on here. Okay? But because this stain is just so thick, I can see a lot of texture, really like sponge texture, which is not, I mean, it's fine if you want to leave it that way and you're like, okay, that's fine. Or if you're doing like a black background or white background, you probably won't have the same issue because you're not using the same kind of deck paint. But since this stuff is kind of thick, I want to get rid of that sponging texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wipe it along the wood grain just lightly. Okay, so that's going to change my texture. So it's almost like I'm doing like a faux finish on a wall right now, and I want to change that faux finish. So while it's still wet, so I'm kind of working quickly, I'm sponging all of this to make sure I get a good coat. Okay, so I like this good coat. But now that I've gotten about half of the sign done, okay, and I've got good coverage, I think, okay, so I'm kind of looking, well, let me just finish this O. Might as well, right? Okay, let me just keep going just a few seconds more. That sponging is like, gives you quite the workout on your arm because you have to just take it slow and work in those little circles. Okay, so now that I've got this, I'm gonna kind of drag a little bit on. I just wanna go up and down just a little bit in my wood grain direction, just to kind of give that fake appearance of stained wood, okay? So this is just a light, I'm lightly going back and forth. And I'm just doing that before it dries, and you'll notice that it totally smoothed out all of that sponging on here. And when I go to peel these stencils up, it's really going to help give it that fake stained look appearance, okay? So now, like I said, I'm kind of breaking my rule just a little bit, but the reason I feel comfortable doing that is because I want the look of the stained wood, and because the stencil's really stuck on there super well. Okay, so now let's go ahead and go my second half, and I really love, I mean, I don't know if you can really see that quite yet, but if you can see, I love the way that looks with that light wiping on there, okay? So let me keep on trucking. Sorry this takes a little while, but you just enjoy yourself. Maybe you're doing this with some friends. If you are, I would love to see some pictures, and you can send me your finished projects. I always love to see that. I need to get better at like posting all of those. That's one of the things I really miss about being in person, is just not having those big group pictures that we have of everybody. So maybe if you could send in your individual picture, then I can put it in a little collage and we'll have like a group picture, okay? This month we had a lot of people like invite new friends and tag their friends and welcome their friends and all of that. So I'm really excited because I have a fall sign that I haven't shown you yet that I made that I'm going to give away to somebody randomly. Like I'm just going to put in one of those little random drawings on the internet. But from somebody who shared this post or from the original post, the flyer, if you shared the post or if you tagged your friends, then you have a chance to win that sign. So that's going to be kind of cool. So I'll post that in the next couple of days who won that door prize. So that's kind of fun. All right. People are always like, your house must be super decorated, like you do this projects all the time. But I tend to give away a lot of the finished projects, so I really don't have hardly any of the stuff I've actually made. So it's kind of silly. All right, obviously the personalized things, I have those, but other than that, a lot of stuff doesn't stay in the house. Okay, so I even had an area kind of down here that lightened up a little bit, and I'm just dabbing it a tiny bit and then wiping it. I kind of got another section done. I'm going to work while it's still wet. I love, it's like, I don't know, I just love this thick stuff. I really think that it gives you the impression of that stained wood because you're getting those streaks just a tiny bit. I'm going to sand mine probably at the end and distress it just a little bit if I can get it to dry enough. But you don't have to do that. If you want it to just be super solid, then you can just do this and it's going on really thick and that should be fine too. So it's just up to you. All right, so we're almost done. Just work our way around here. Our boo sign is still not quite dry, but it's getting there. So we're going to skip back over to that to show you how to peel up the vinyl in just a second. But I'm going to go through here and finish all my dabbing. Just enjoy this step. If you have any, I had a little bit of paint that came over the side when I was doing my edges that I didn't go back and like flatten out. So it kind of dried with a little bit of texture. So you might want to keep an eye out on that while you're doing your edges. If something comes over to the front, just kind of smooth it out so you don't end up with any texture. Doesn't really bother me as much because I know I'm going to go sand those edges, but just in case, especially if you're going for that solid look, just make sure that you kind of wipe those if you want to. And if not, and if you can't get it off, it's no big deal. You can sand it down and you can just touch up those areas with your brown. No big deal. Just pretend everything you do is on purpose and nothing is a mistake, right? Bob Ross says are just happy little accidents and we'll turn them into something beautiful, okay? I mean, I think we're all like our biggest critic. So when you look at your sign, you might think that it doesn't look good, but if you asked anybody else, they would think that you bought it at Hobby Lobby. So maybe even Kirkland's, okay? We'll get real fancy schmancy, okay? So don't be so critical on yourself because I promise that you're the only one that sees the little tiny imperfections in your sign. Nobody else sees that. All right, I got my coverage. So now I'm just going to continue my little very light dragging on here just to give me that wood grain effect. I love it. I think it looks so good. All right, so now I need this to dry, but I'm going to kind of go and try not to get my hair in it. Be careful if you're going back and messing with it while it's still wet because it'll kind of drag some of that paint off, but I don't care if this one's imperfect because I'm going to go back and sand it. All right, that looks awesome. Kind of look from a bird's eye view if there's anything I want to touch up. All right, that looks great. Okay, let me wipe my fingers just a little bit so I can work on this boo stencil. All right, now, so for this next step, the easiest thing to do is to just wait until the stencil is totally dry. I mean, the sign is totally dry before you start messing with your stencil. For the sake of time, I'm not going to do that. Ooh, a little spot that came off. Let me touch that up. Okay, which is totally fine. So we have tons of paint. You should have plenty. So if you're messing with your stencil right now and it's still wet, just be super careful, okay? Kind of the worst thing that could happen would be that you start peeling it up and then it falls back down and some of that black paint like paints onto your white. That would be kind of a bum. But other than that, it's not too terrible to do it while it's wet, but I think it's a lot easier to do when it's totally dry. So I usually wait, like, so if we were having a party in person, I'd be like, okay, let's clean up and, you know, let's socialize just a little bit and let's get this to dry. I'm just trying to get some of this black off my finger so that I don't accidentally touch any of my white. Okay, so now I'm going to put this Giganto sign up here. Pull my boo sign back. All right. Now, I got my sharp tool. So in my case, I'm using this thread puller, which I totally lost for like ever, and one of my boys just found it today, so I was super excited. He knew I needed it for tonight. All right, so now I'm gonna peel up these letters, and these letters are gonna become trash. So this part is like a little bit nerve-wracking, but also like exciting, okay? So I'm gonna be careful. I don't wanna scratch my project because you might be able to see that in the end, but I'm literally just trying to get that needle right in between the very edge of the stencil and under that stencil, okay? I just need to get that in one tiny spot, and if I get that in one tiny spot, ta-da, the whole letter comes up. How cool is that? Isn't that pretty cool? All right. I love that black and white. It looks so good. All right, and I'm doing the same thing. I just barely got underneath there and pull that up. Throw that to the side. And I actually have a couple spots on each of my letters that's dry, so the spot that I'm choosing to pull up is dry, so I'm cheating a little bit. So even though my sign is totally wet, I really am aiming for spots that are dry. Okay, got that letter. Work our way down. Now, I'm going to start with this spider web. Okay, so when I just did that, since I'm doing this wet, I totally scratched my sign a little bit. So I put the stencil back down, and I'm going to touch it up just a tiny bit before I go to peel it up. That'll save me from having to do it later. All right, so let me grab this part of this spider. And that all should come up. Oh, kind of creepy, right? Get that off of my fingers. All right. So I'm just trying not to get anything on the white letters now that they're off, okay? So my last piece is just my spider web. And this one's fun because it should all come up in one. Yay! Oh. And I had a tiny bit of leaking, like where I had ripped this stencil a little bit. So that's the other cool part about having something sharp is if I have any kind of like little leak, just to help me fix that, I use my little needle to scrape it just a teeny tiny bit, and that kind of helps get that sharp line a little bit better. Let me flip this around, and then I'm gonna just touch that up, especially because mine is still a little bit wet where it leaked. It's kind of easy to touch up, but you can really just use your needle to go in there and touch up those spots. And the other thing you can do is you could dip your needle or a teeny tiny piece of your sponge, like cut a little piece of your sponge off, but I could totally like dip my needle in there, and I can just use that tiny little bit of paint that's on the end of my needle. I can use that to touch up. And I normally don't do this because honestly I don't care if it's a little bit off because I like it like that, but with this particular sign I kind of wanted it to be really perfect, so I touched up those tiny little spots. And there you go. Pretty cool, huh? So that one looks awesome. So now our welcome sign is definitely not dry, but we're going to go ahead and pull it off just so you can get a sense of what it is going to look like. The only thing I may not be able to do is to sand it, but let's see how it goes. All right, since this one was thicker, I'm having a little bit of a harder time seeing where that stencil is, and I just don't want to scratch it. And of course this one stuck better, so it's going to be a little bit harder to peel up. My advice for the wreath is always start at the end of the wreath that has the little tiny branch and pull this way. It just all will come up in one piece. If you start at the top where the leaf is and you pull back, it will all tear apart into different leaves. All right, so then I'm going to get my E somewhere. I'm just trying to be real careful to not scratch the sign, but it's hard to do because it's so wet. So I'm going to be just real careful. But you should not have that problem, of course, because you don't have to do this part when it's wet. You can wait. I'm just going to go ahead and do it so we can, for the sake of time and the sake of our video, I want you to be able to see the finished project. Okay? All right, so we've got the baby. All right, I'm going to be careful that I don't touch my vinyl back down, because it's all still just totally covered in that brown stain. All right, and then if I need to get something like a little piece I left behind, I can just use that needle or that poker, whatever you're using. Oh, look at that. I mean, look at that contrast. Isn't that so cool? So pretty. All right, let me just keep on trucking. Get my O. Yeah, there's like zero leakage at all on this sign, so you'll be able to tell the difference. Like if your vinyl really sticks down there, you shouldn't have to worry at all about any leaks, or even whenever if you want to, if you don't do quite as well just dabbing and you rub the paint on there, especially because this one is like so big, I don't think you'll have any problems with that. So if it sticks as well as mine did, you will be totally fine. I mean, it does not want to come off. It is just happy where it is. All right. 2 more letters and a wreath, and we'll get to see it. Almost got it in one piece. It finally came apart. All right. So like I said, I don't think I'm going to be able to sand this one. So once I get done, that'll be the end. Just so you don't have to wait here while it dries. But what I'll do is once I get this one nice and sanded and the way I like it, then I'll go ahead and post a picture of that so you can kind of see. I'm going to give you a little bit of instruction on how to sand it. And very similar to the way that we sanded at the very beginning. I had a tiny little piece of my wood kind of come up just a little bit, so it made a liar out of me since I said this is the wood that doesn't peel up. And it doesn't usually, but no big deal. I'm going to take a little corner of a sponge that was clean. So even though it's my black sponge, that part I hadn't used, I'm just going to touch up that little tiny spot. If it was dry and it did that, then I would like sand it off and then touch it up a little bit, which is totally fine too. I'm going to touch up that spot. But of course, I wouldn't notice that in my finished project because I'm going to sand mine a little bit to give it a little bit of a weathered, distressed look. Okay? Now, the other reason you don't really want this to be like in the middle of the weather is that the white is not exterior paint. So even though the brown is exterior paint, the white is like, it's still really good paint. It's like the expensive Sherwin-Williams stuff, but it is interior. So it's not going to offer quite as much protection as it would. If you get like a little bit of runoff, like maybe some splashing or things like that. Another thing you can do is you could just spray or wipe this with like a clear poly, and that'll help protect it some too. All right, so here I have it. My welcome sign is all finished. I don't even think you'll be able to see because it's so gigantic. Okay, you can kind of get a look here. Doesn't that look awesome? Ta-da! And I'll post a picture. Try not to whack myself with it. It's still so wet, I'm trying to handle it. Okay, and I'll post a picture when it's all done. But like I said, when it's totally dry, you definitely don't want to sand it before it's like super dry. You might want to wait a couple hours or even like the next day. Then I'm going to use my sandpaper just like I did at the beginning whenever we just did like the very edges. I like to really just get that corner all the way around. I go a little bit more on the four corners to give it like a little bit of a distressed look. But with sanding, I think it's pretty hard to undo. So you want to just go very light and see if you like it before you just kind of go all out. So I've had some people, you know, you spend this long on a sign and then they take their sandpaper and they're like, whoa, and they just start sanding all over their sign. And they might scratch it or make it look like they don't want it to look, and then they're like, what do I do? Well, it's really hard to fix it at that point. So I'd rather you just do a little bit and kind of see if you like it and then keep going. Or you can just leave it pristine. So just kind of like the boo sign, you can leave this one, you know, just like that if you don't like it to be like rustic or anything. But if you like it rustic, I would do the very edges, a little bit focus on the corners. You could do a little bit in the middle, especially if you had like a big error and you want to kind of cover that. You can definitely sand the middle of the sign, but just be careful because I don't want you to mess it up and then not like it. And if you need another stencil, if you really mess it up and you really are just heartbroken because you don't love it, then please just let me know and I'll do whatever I can to help you love your project. So that's it. So I hope that you enjoyed yourself, and I hope that you're walking away from tonight with a beautiful new sign to decorate your house. And I just want to say thank you for supporting our family and for crafting with us. I hope you had a great time.